Good evening to all of you. My name is Don Byers. I serve as a priest and pastor here at St. Anne's, which is a real gift and joy to be in such an incredible parish. But it's a particular joy for me to welcome you to tonight's talk and to be in this incredible space. How many of you have had a chance to be in here before? Lovely. As you know, this church is a historic site. It's a gem of the city, and I say it's better than St. James Cathedral, but do not tell the dean that. I do think it's better. Welcome to St. Anne's. I want you to know it is a real joy for me, and I know for this parish. I have some members of our community with us tonight. A joy to welcome you into this incredible space, and it's also a joy to work with Father Jeff and with the alumni and the faculty of Trinity College as well. We're very, very blessed to have you with us this night. So I welcome you, St. Anne's, and look forward to a great talk tonight. So thank you.
I'm the Reverend Mary Kate Garden, and I'm here on behalf of the Trinity Divinity Associates. I'm the Vice President, and we are so excited to see so many of you here and so many people from across the diocese and beyond. So it's really lovely to have you gather here. Like any good project, any exciting project, it takes a lot of people, and we've been living with this idea and this hope that Sam Wells could come and speak, and one day it all became so. And so we're very, very excited to welcome you to this evening for this lecture, but also to welcome you to what's going to be a year of looking at this idea of church outside the walls, the humbler church, the bigger God. We are, some of you may know that Trinity, the Divinity faculty, the alumni had held a conference for a number of years, and for the last while it's been a sort of a two-day or one-day event. We're going a little bit outside that format this year, and so this is the inaugural event in a really exciting year. You're going to hear a little bit more about that at the end from my colleague Matthew Kieswetter, who is the president of the Divinity Alumni. In the meantime, I have some thank yous and just some acknowledgements to Father Don and to the congregation of St. Anne's for inviting us into this lovely space, to the congregation of the Holy Myrrh Bearers who worked along with us, Father Jeffrey Reddy, who's been integral in this process, and his team with the Reimagining Contemporary Ministries, to the Faculty of Divinity at Trinity University at the University of Toronto. Thank you to everybody from Andrea, our invaluable resource person, to our Dean, Christopher Britton. This has been such a collective, and we're looking forward to working in partnership with all of these people over the coming year. So it's my very great pleasure to turn this over to Father Jeffrey Reddy to introduce our speaker for this evening, the Rev Dr. Sam Wells. Jeffrey Reddy.
Thanks very much, Mary Kate. So I'm Jeffrey Reddy, Director of Orthodox Christian Studies and Director of Reimagining Contemporary Ministries for a Renewing Church, it's a mouthful, at the Faculty of Divinity of Trinity College. And it is my great honor and privilege and really my joy to introduce to you this evening the Reverend Dr. Samuel Wells. He is known as the Vicar of St. Martin in the Fields, which is the parish right off Trafalgar Square in London. If you haven't been there or can't picture that, if you've got your back to the column with Horatio Nelson at the top and you're facing the National Gallery, the church is a little bit up on an incline to your right. And maybe more interestingly for us, when you're standing at the church and looking across the square, what you see is Canada House, the Canadian High Commission to the United Kingdom. So all the Canadian flags there. And I'm saying that mostly so that when Sam goes back, he thinks of us, whenever he goes to church, to remember this visit. Samuel Wells is a prolific author. I know all about that from my diminishing bank balance over many years. I think the count on the website of St. Martin in the Fields is 44, but that's way off base. I think we're talking into the 50s by now. It's a remarkable set of theological works, works in ethics, works in pastoral studies, works that are immensely practical in theology, and works that have really influenced me personally over the years. Any of you who have been in my courses over the years have already met Sam Wells. My Orthodox Life course on Orthodox Christian ethics uses Sam Wells' book, Improvisation, the Drama of Christian Ethics, as its core text. You might be thinking, what has an Anglican vicar in London got to do with Orthodox Christian ethics, except that it is by far and away the best distillation of patristic thinking around virtue ethics and living the narrative of the scriptures that we're called to do. So over many years, Sam has been a great influence to me. Amongst other things, he is visiting professor of ethics at King's College. He is the husband of Bishop Joe Wells, who plays a very important role within the Anglican Communion. But if I were to ask, why is it that I read Sam Wells, and why is it also that I foist Sam Wells on my students, on my parishioners, on people who listen to the podcast that I do, I can think of very few people that, as much as he does, is able to bridge from that narrative theological tradition that is so important to me, grounded in the scriptures, grounded in our liturgy, grounded in the living tradition of the church, bridging that to the now. And I don't just mean the obvious now, the now that maybe you read about in the newspapers or can, talk about in the coffee shops. I mean, the prescient now, the prophetic now, looking into the heart of how things really are. And I thought that it would be useful to use an analogy for this, and it's from somebody who was born in southwestern Ontario in the 1960s, like Sam Wells was, not too far away from where Sam was born, but who over time became relatively adept at ice hockey and was asked how did he do that? Well, he said, this is Wayne Gretzky, I don't skate to where the puck has been, I skate to where it's going to. And I think that rather sums up what Sam Wells does with his theology. He is moving towards where the church is going, where the world is going, and that's been really important, I think, for a lot of us. More, or as important as that, let's say, is the fact that that work, when he does it, is suffused with hope. So much of what we read today is a narrative of decline, it's a narrative of scarcity, it's a narrative of, a post-Christendom world where we are lamenting some sort of nostalgic past, and Sam deals with that, but also brings us to a moment and a place of hope where we can together move on towards being really the church we should have been all along, really the kind of people called after the name of Jesus Christ that we should have been all along. So it is with great joy that I introduce to you this evening, and I'm looking forward with all of you to hear what Sam Wells has to bring to us. But, Sam.
Well, thank you, Geoffrey, so much for that very warm introduction, all of you, for this very warm welcome to this magnificent building. As Geoffrey said, some of you may know, I was born in Chatham, Ontario, too many years ago, and this is a homecoming for me. It's the first time in Toronto for quite a while, not the first time in Ontario for a little while, and I'm absolutely delighted to be here. Geoffrey has been very helpful to me, and particularly in writing the book that I was writing last year, and I'm here to say thank you to him and to say hello to you, and hello again to some of you who I've met before. My remarks are entitled Here I Stand with God, a little gesture there to Martin Luther, and we've already had a little gesture to Wayne Gretzky, so maybe I'll land somewhere in between the two. I'm going to make my remarks in three parts. I'm going to begin by reflecting on what it's like for all of us to face our mortality. For all our passion about who wins an athletic contest or fixation on getting a job we've applied for, in the end the overwhelming challenge of our lives is how we live in the face of the fact that we're going to die. Then second, I'm going to identify what I discern to be the constituents of a life we can live in the face of our mortality. third, I'm going to try to draw together the first set of insights with the second set and articulate the convictions around which I base my life. So I begin with our mortality. Probably all of us have stood by a graveside or otherwise contemplated the loss of a person we cherished and cannot imagine being without. And I'm sure every one of us has looked down the tunnel of our own death and wondered what will become of me. Both what, if anything, will be my future and what will become of all my thoughts and deeds my whole life long. What we're pondering about a close companion or ourselves is the question of significance. What will last when the tide of time and mortality sweeps all away? I'm going to outline one possible approach to finding significance and then consider 4 alternatives. The simple approach I'll call humility. How, I think, can I have any significance in a universe of 100 million galaxies where each galaxy has 100 million stars? I am unimaginably small, and the possibility of my having any true significance is denial and fantasy. I shall just try to plough my little furrow and find a little happiness, live peaceably with my neighbours, and maybe leave the world a little better than I found it. It sounds a simple ethic, but it's not a place many people can remain a whole lifetime. Humankind has within it an urge to seek, to strive, to yearn, to dream for something more. Mere humility can be a sign of deep contentment, but can also be a counsel of despair and resignation, like going down with a ship without even trying out one of the lifeboats. Our search for survival and our need to matter require us to tend in one of the subsequent 4 directions. The first of which I'll call hustle. For some people, life is inherently competitive, and you need to get your elbows out to survive and thrive. You have to be crafty, to learn a few skills to get ahead of others, and to suppress any pangs of conscience that might slow you down. There's no use speculating on how or why we came to be here. Life is a game, and the stopwatch has already started, so best grab and seize and snatch and grasp so you can consume and acquire and control and collect, and thus diminish your vulnerability and enhance your security. Hustle believes life is fundamentally constituted by desire, and the secret is to discover and implement techniques for attaining the object of desire more successfully than others, in a universe essentially constituted by competition. Something like this lies behind every workaholic, overfunctioner, or overachiever, each of whom thinks that idleness is the path to doom, yet success is attainable if only they try hard enough. A more sophisticated alternative I'll call honour. Honour is where you say, I can't comprehend the magnitude of what existence entails, so I'm going to hold on to just a few things that will come over time to constitute my identity. Perhaps a spouse, maybe children, possibly my country, especially if its integrity is at stake. Maybe a cause close to my experience, like helping people who face motor neuron disease or raising money for leukemia research. Things I'm happy to wear on my sleeve and fight for. That's where I find significance. Honour believes life may be driven by impersonal forces like physics and economics, but to make life human means holding tight to certain things as long as possible until time and mortality eventually pries them from your grasp. A third approach I'll call HeartEdge. This recognises that there isn't a question we face in life that others haven't faced countless times before, and thus that it might be an idea to spend time seriously ingesting the best wisdom available and inhabiting a tradition with time-honoured validity. Yes, we might find ourselves sometimes in tension with it, and yes, it does require us to set aside the impulse to find out everything for ourselves. But while our forebears didn't know everything, it's idle to say the human search for truth only began when I showed up. HeartEdge believes that the sum total of human creativity and Earth's fecundity constitute an object of wonder from which we can spend a lifetime simply learning. The meaning lies in the whole rather than a single nugget of truth. The last form of the search for significance we could call the Homeric. This sees each of us as solitary individuals pursuing a lone quest for meaning and truth in an indifferent and sometimes hostile world. Life is an odyssey in which the ship of our existence puts in at various harbours, geographical, professional, emotional and psychological, and we put together our own significance as a patchwork of memories, dreams and reflections. The Homeric quest believes life is a perpetual journey, and the discovery is that the wisdom gained en route proves more significant than any destination. While I share the intense desire for existence in general and my life in particular to have significance, and I see the appeal of all of these ways of seeking it, I want to identify some things they all lack, which I believe are essential to any true significance. What's implicit in humility and shows up slightly in the HeartEdge approach but not elsewhere is the truth that the story of everything doesn't have me as the main character. The first step to finding significance is to decenter yourself from the story. Our significance is not in the way all other things in the universe amplify the wondrous splendor of ourselves. It lies in finding our place in a story. What's hinted at in honour but absent in the other approaches is that the true quality of existence lies in relationship. Not just, as in HeartEdge, our relationship with those who can inform, educate and entertain us, but in finding relationship that has no extraneous value and is valid simply for the relationship itself. Meanwhile, significance is not something you chisel out like a sculpture creating a statue. Significance is something that's bestowed. It's like belonging. You can't achieve it. It has to be given and gradually discovered. And the last thing the conventional approaches to finding significance don't tend to grasp is that we find meaning and truth in story. Story is the way we order a sequence of otherwise incoherent and unconnected insights, characters and events into a plausible and compelling whole. So rather than pursue the path of humility, hustle, honour, heritage or Homeric quest, I found significance in these 4 insights. Significance is not achieved but bestowed. Significance is fundamentally found in relationship. Relationship is characterized by story. And the way to understand story is to begin by recognizing the story is not fundamentally about me. All of these crystallize in the notion of belonging. Thus, belonging can't be achieved or earned. It is always a gift, a sense of being offered solidarity where there could easily or has previously been isolation. Belonging is always about relationship, about a pattern of interactions that transcend the instrumental and become valid for their own sake. Belonging is invariably understood in terms of story, a story of exclusion or ostracism turning into one of mutuality, acceptance and embrace. And belonging is always about finding a truth deeper than one can embody alone. A truth that lies beyond, a truth more mystical than merely rational, a truth that however close you draw to it, you still in some sense behold and cannot quantify. These 4 features of belonging you may already have noticed all have rather familiar Christian names. The first, that it's all gift, is conventionally called grace. The second, that it's all about relationship, is customarily called love. The third, that relationship finds its character in the form of story, is called hope. And the fourth, that the story isn't one fundamentally about us, but is centered elsewhere, in one who graciously incorporates us regardless of our desiring or deserving. That final feature is called faith. By naming grace together with faith, hope and love, I've brought our search for significance into the realm of Christianity, but perhaps not from a conventional route. I want to continue in this trajectory and see how these four features work together to constitute a place that we might stand. I'm going to take you on a journey of 7 steps, by which I suggest we may arrive at a healthy combination of humility, hustle, honour, heritage and Homeric quest, all reshaped by faith, hope, love and grace. So to step 1. I'm going to start with the nature of all things. Here we have 3 choices. We can say, as some astrophysicists do, that there's only one reality, that there's no need for an external cause for the Big Bang, that existence began in a massive explosion and will one day cease in a big crunch, and that time and space are so causally connected that in the end there's no difference between them. That's choice 1. Choice 2 is that there are 2 realities. There's something called essence, which lasts forever, and there's something called existence, which lasts for a limited time. There was no need for there ever to be existence, and thus the fact of existence is the original mystery, miracle, marvel that stands at the pinnacle of all awesome discoveries. See how choice 2 decenters existence and dismantles the self-importance of our lives. Existence itself, the foundation of all we think we know, is itself contingent on something beyond, something more central, something more permanent. That's choice 2. Choice 3 is that this universe is only one of a number of universes, and thus that there's multiple existences. That's a mind-boggling notion, whether those multiple existences are 8 or 8 billion. But from the perspective of choice 2, it's still very limited. Because when choice 2 talks of essence, essence isn't just a parallel existence, or even 8 million such alternative existences. Essence is utterly different in quality from existence and infinitely more textured and complex. A good way to get a glimpse of the glory of essence is that it's indescribably more wondrous than a million universes. You can see why, given this threefold choice between the singularity of self-contained existence, the duality of an existence that issues out of essence, and the multiplicity of many existences, I take my stand on the ground of the duality of existence and essence. This seems to me the only explanation for this world, this universe being so much, yet not everything. It's not territory any but the boldest astrophysicist would venture into, because physics, by definition, studies existence and has no judgment on essence. Which is why I don't find reading books about astrophysics threatening, to the extent that I understand them. Because they're not talking about what I'm thinking about. Space and time have little or nothing to do with eternity. So here's my first platform. There is existence, and beyond existence there is essence. Here I stand. Now to the second step. What is essence? Let's go back to my 4 insights. First, significance is not achieved but bestowed. That begs the question, who does the bestowing? Second, significance is fundamentally found in relationship. I'm going to pause there and come back to the other 2 in a moment. Essence is relationship. That's another choice point. It seems to me it's one of the most distinctive elements of Christianity. Islam and Judaism understand the notion of divine-human relationship. But Christianity maintains that essence, or that which lasts forever, or God, as we most often say, is inherently relationship. The language Christianity uses for this is Trinity. God is 3 persons in utter and dynamic relationship. That's the heart of it all. That's the epicenter of everything, the epitome of truth. The choices again are 3. Option 1, essence is impersonal, mechanical, a physical, chemical reaction, but no more. Option 2, essence is personal and purposive. Option 3, essence is inherently relational, not just externally but internally. God is a trinity of persons, equal, interactive, effervescent. You'll see how option 3 is indescribably more awesome and wondrous than the other two options. Here we see the fundamental heart of Christianity. God, who is utter relationship, overflows from that relationship into seeking a relationship beyond, a relationship with a partner, an enormous plenitude of partners. It's often said that Judaism, Islam, and Christianity believe in the same God. Well, that's of course true if you're saying that there's a difference between essence that lasts forever and existence that doesn't, and that God is about essence and we're about existence. But the Christian understanding of God is that relationship isn't a second step for God, but absolutely what God is. The Trinity isn't a person that chooses to pursue relationship. The Trinity is relationship itself. Which means in our lives in existence, relationship isn't a route to a destination of something more useful, valuable, or tangible. Relationship is that destination. So here's my second platform. God is relationship and seeks relationship. Here I stand. And so to the third step. What does it entail for God to seek relationship? It entails two things. The first is that God must be so shaped as to be in external relationship. This is a great mystery. Was God utterly fulfilled in inner Trinitarian dynamics, moved in some way to be altered to make relationship elsewhere? Or was that, from all eternity, always God's shape and inclination? Whatever the answer to that question, the name we give to the shape God takes to be in external relationship is incarnation. Incarnation means God being completely God, but also being completely human. It means something Genesis doesn't fully say and Darwin doesn't allow for, that God being with us in Christ was the reason for existence in the first place. Humanity came about not simply as a result of evolution or as a consequence of God wanting a companion. Humankind exists so God could be incarnate. The second thing entailed in God's pursuit of relationship is the need for a setting for that relationship. The name of that setting is creation. Creation comes about as the setting for the incarnation. So here is my third platform. God is relationship and seeks relationship. Creation owes its existence not simply to the Big Bang as for astrophysics or evolution as for Darwin, or simply to God's creative impulse as for Genesis, but as the theatre in which God would become one like us and dwell with us. That is the purpose behind existence. Here I stand. Now to the fourth step. Where is existence going? I said earlier that it's in the definition of existence that it doesn't last forever. It would be a bit harsh to call it an experiment, but it's certainly provisional in contrast to essence that's permanent and eternal. This next step is perhaps an even bigger one to get our head round than the notion that creation came about as a theatre for God to be with us in Christ. This is the ultimate purpose of all things. And that is as a kind of reverse of the incarnation. The purpose of creation is that God became what we are and be with us in Christ. But creation doesn't have the last word. That's not by any means the end of the story. The end of the story is that we become what God is, at least in the sense that through resurrection we become God's companions forever. Beyond creation, beyond mortality, beyond the flaws of our current existence. That we are with God, with one another, and with the new creation forever. We are taken into essence, not to be God, but to be eternally with God. Not to be absorbed into God, but to be in God's presence, as the Psalm says, where we find the fullness of joy. So here's my fourth platform. The ultimate purpose of humankind is to be God's companion forever. which shows God has no ultimate aim that does not involve being with us, and that we have no ultimate meaning other than in relationship to God. Here I stand. The fifth step is to say, how do we know that there is essence beyond existence? How do we know that that essence is personal, indeed Trinitarian? How do we know that God seeks relationship and destines us to be in relationship forever? The answer to all these questions is a single word. That word is Jesus. Imagine an hourglass and think of the top half as existence, which thinks of itself as all-encompassing and yet is largely unaware of the bottom half, on which it depends, which is essence. Then focus your attention on the aperture between the top half of the hourglass and the bottom. That aperture through which all the sound passes wholly belongs to the top half and wholly belongs to the bottom half. That aperture is Jesus, through whom God is with us, and through whom we are with God. As we customarily put it, Jesus is fully human and fully divine. This fifth step is perhaps where a person of my convictions ought to begin. I didn't begin there because I'm not sure we fully appreciate step 5 until we've got a grasp of the first 4 steps. Now, there are 2 common misconceptions about Jesus. The first, that of what we might call the world, is that Jesus is simply fully human. This is a perfectly understandable view. The Christian claims about something absolutely unique and completely unique phenomena are almost by definition, and certainly by scientific method, practically unbelievable. We need to set aside aspirations to proof and accept that it's almost impossible to prove or disprove a unique phenomenon. I actually welcome the secular view that Jesus is fully human because it's a healthy counter to the alternative misconception. That's the hyper-Christian popular view that Jesus is wholly divine and no more than superficially human at all. That latter view devalues existence as the price of asserting essence. It takes away the very heart of Christianity, which is God seeking genuine relationship with us so earnestly that God becomes one of us without ceasing to be God. And here we've reached the epicenter of what I think Christianity is fundamentally about. It's about the truth deep in the heart of God, made known in God's covenant with Israel, fully and utterly embodied in the life of Jesus, and to be finally realized in the life we'll share beyond existence, that the bedrock of all reality and purpose, and the only sure ground of significance, lies in the word with. All solitariness is ancillary to togetherness. All endeavour is a means towards the end of being with one another. The life of God, the nature of the Trinity of Father, Son, and Holy Spirit is inherently relational. Relationship isn't a collaborative technique to enhance effectiveness and pool resources to advance towards some worthy end. It is the end towards which all things tend. In the life beyond existence, in the eternity of essence, there will be no work, no striving, no means we have to employ to reach some appropriate end. There will be only end, only relationship, only with. We will be with God, with ourselves, with one another, and with the renewed creation. The 4 great divisions, the 4 great alienations of our existence, our separation from God, ourselves, one another, and the creation, will cease. All will be relationship, and relationship will be more than enough, beyond every beyond. All of this we discover in Jesus. We see in the Gospels how Jesus is utterly with God, speaking as Son to Father, utterly in sync with the Spirit. We see how Jesus is utterly with himself, content alone, content to linger in Nazareth, content with his calling, content with the costs of his coming. We see how Jesus is utterly with us, weeping at the death of Lazarus, abiding with Mary and Martha, standing alongside the woman caught in adultery, in the Beatitudes offering his own autobiography of solidarity with the deprived and oppressed. We see how Jesus is utterly with creation, dwelling with the wild beasts in the wilderness, walking on the water, describing his realm in the imagery of agriculture. So here is my fifth platform. Jesus is Emmanuel, God with us, as he was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be. Here I stand. The sixth step is to recognize the tragedy of Jesus being with us. And this is to return to the third of the four insights I outlined earlier. Relationship is characterized by story. The relationship between God and humankind embodied by Jesus does not go well. Jesus experiences betrayal, desertion, perfidy, oppression, injustice, calumny, humiliation, agony, insult, violence, hatred. Humankind has an allergic reaction to being with God. The Gospels tell the story of who Jesus is, how he manifests what it means to be with us, and how we utterly fail to be with him. Every human being can locate themselves among the range of responses the Gospels portray towards Jesus. But these responses are not static. Jesus does not come among us simply at an isolated moment in time. He experiences the danger of Bethlehem, the escape of Egypt, the nurture of Nazareth, the wilds of the wilderness, the fervour of Galilee, the maelstrom of Jerusalem, the restoration of Galilee again. His story encompasses the range, the undulation, and the scope of human emotion and experience, in its grief and joy, its fear and hope. It devalues the texture of this story and empties Jesus' being with us of all significance, if one assumes Jesus came among us in order to die. That is not to deny his death was inevitable, in due course because he was fully human, and perhaps as a young man and brutally because humankind was always likely to have an allergic reaction to him. But to acknowledge these things is not to say he came with a specific commission to take on his shoulders the whole weight of human shortcomings and by his death atone for them. Such a claim misses the heart of Christianity. Jesus came to embody definitively what it means, always meant, and always will mean for God to be with us. That's a much bigger scope than simply coming to eradicate sin. If I now summarise the 5 steps I've outlined to this point, the significance of the cross should become clear. Number 1, there is existence, and beyond existence there is essence. Number 2, God is relationship and seeks relationship. Number 3, creation is the theatre in which God becomes one like us and dwells with us. Number 4, the ultimate purpose of humankind is to be God's companion forever. Number 5, Jesus is God with us. Now consider those 5 statements in the light of the cross. To say all 5 statements depend on Jesus dying in a particular way to conquer something or substitute for someone or be a sacrifice to atone for something else is absurd. The mistake such claims make is crystallized in my 4th insight earlier. They all assume the story is about us. They all assume the point of God is to fix our 2 human problems. Number 1, mortality, that we die, and number 2, guilt, that we sin. And that Jesus is a piece of technology that neatly fixes these 2 problems and then is no further use to us. But that is the fundamental flaw in anthropocentric theology. It makes God a device in an intrinsically human story. What we need to do is to turn the story round and make it a truly theocentric story, a story received from God's point of view. This is a discipline known as theology after all. The clue is in the name. Once we do that, this is what we see. God is relationship, the persons of the Trinity being with one another. God creates the universe for relationship, fundamentally to be with us. God ultimately purposes to draw us into essence and thus to be with us in the renewed creation forever. In Jesus, God comes among us in an embodied way to be with us definitively and utterly. Against this heritage and destiny, we can see clearly what the cross means. If Jesus walks down the Via Dolorosa and halfway along says, actually, do you know what? don't fancy it. Could you send those armies of angels and scoop me up so I don't have to go through with this? The crisis is not that he flukes the moment when he fixes the human sin and guilt problem. The crisis is that God has in Trinity, creation, eschatology and incarnation displayed an absolutely consistent commitment to be with us come what may, whatever befall, and that here when that resolution, which is the very identity of God, is put to its ultimate test, Jesus would be denying the intrinsic reality of who he is, who God is. It would question, overturn, discredit, even invalidate the fundamental character of God, the very bedrock of their essence and existence. That's some crisis. That's a far more poignant understanding of the cross than the idea that Jesus was performing some kind of preordained script. So Jesus does go to the cross after reflecting most obviously in the Garden of Gethsemane on the reasons why he might not want to do so. And what exactly happens on the cross? Why is the cross rightly the centre of Christian devotion, even if not because it's a device for fixing our sin and guilt problem? Two things happen on the cross. First, Jesus has to choose between being with the Father and being with us. The way the cross stretches Jesus to breaking point is clear in his dying words, my God, why have you forsaken me? This moment literally tears Jesus in two because he is fully human and fully God, but right at this second he can't be fully with us and fully with the Father. And the moment is made more acute because we have done everything we could possibly do to make it clear we don't want to be with him. Yet he still chooses to be with us. That's what the cross means. God's utter, unshakable will to be with us regardless of our aversion to return the compliment and whatever the cost to God. Heart of my own heart, whatever before. But there's more. There's the second thing that happens on the cross. The Father has to choose whether to let the Son be with us or whether to insist that the relationship of the Trinity is unbreakable, even if that means sundering God's unshakable commitment to be with us. Notice Jesus' dying words, Father, into your hands I commend my spirit. Spirit is usually translated with a lowercase s, but it could just as easily be translated with a capital S and mean Holy Spirit. Jesus is saying he is utterly bereft and alone, abandoned by humankind and isolated from the Father and the Holy Spirit. This is the most awesome moment in all eternity. Yet the Father lets it happen because Jesus is embodying and enduring the ultimate consequence of God's fundamental commitment to be with us come what may. It's not a conquest, it's a gift. If there's any triumph, it's the triumph of with over for. It's the complete demonstration that God is a God of with rather than a God of for, a God of solidarity rather than a God of fixing problems. That is the climax of the story of God, a demonstration that we will never walk alone. Here I stand. The seventh step is the vindication of the first 5 steps in the face of the 6th step. In short, the apocalyptic sight of Jesus going to such lengths to be with us that it jeopardizes the integrity of the Trinity does not have the last word. The last word lies with the Spirit breathing new life into Jesus and reuniting the Trinity and restoring God and humankind to be with one another again and forever. The word for all these things is resurrection. And the moment they all take place at the same time is Easter Day. Note what Easter Day isn't. It isn't the immediate and total obliteration of our guilt and mortality problem. This is the other flaw in the traditional account of Christ's Passion. In the traditional account, Jesus conquers sin and death, but as countless observers have noted, not least in the light of the Armenian genocide, the Holocaust, and the Rwandan genocide, to name but 3 of the most egregious moments in human history, sin and death are still very much with us. But so is Jesus. And that is the point. If you take the assumption of that God is for us and is around to fix all our problems, then you must accept the criticisms of those in every century who've said that God is either a monster, a failure, or more politely an underachiever. But if you take the recognition that God is with us, you realise the resurrection is a statement not of conquest, but of utter unbreakable and unending solidarity, whatever happens. Easter is a convergence of creation. Remember, it happens on the first day of the week. And eschatology, because it displays in Jesus what will happen to humankind and the whole creation on the last day. It shows us the presence of God in Christ that we see in the incarnation and the relentless commitment of God to us that we behold in the crucifixion. It is truly the day of all days that contains every other day. The resurrection proclaims and demonstrates that eternity will be with God and nothing can separate us from God's love. Here I stand. We can imagine Eastern and Western theology like this. Western theology is like an arch that stretches from the fall to the cross. It's obsessed with the way the cross reverses the results of the fall. Eastern theology has a much larger arch that begins before the fall of creation and ends after the cross of the last day. Hence, despite the Eastern Orthodox Church being much smaller than the Western Catholic and Protestant churches, Eastern theologians have asserted that they have a much bigger God. I humbly suggest that the story I've been telling here is a third arch, bigger still than the Eastern arch, one that stretches from Trinity to eternity. And I humbly suggest that though the Eastern arch is commendably bigger than the Western arch, the Eastern arch is still rather too much of an anthropocentric story, and is still too much tied to a God of four, whereas the third arch I'm describing is a theocentric story about a God of with. So that's the second part of my lecture on the 7 steps that shape the ground on which I stand. I want to take you back to the 4 insights about significance I mentioned at the beginning. You'll recall I maintained that significance is not achieved but bestowed. Significance is fundamentally found in relationship. Relationship is characterized by story. The way to understand story is to begin by recognizing the story is not fundamentally about me. What I want to suggest is that these 4 insights offer us the elements from which we can build an account of what sin is. For me, sin is that which inhibits being with, that denies our origin and contradicts our destiny, that runs counter to our purpose and obscures our identity. To take the first insight, sin is an action that entirely denies our existence as a gift, but instead treats it as a right and an entitlement to do with as we please. To take the second insight, sin is that which dismantles, poisons and destroys relationship. To take the third insight, sin substitutes a false story for a true one. To take the fourth insight, sin makes the story always about me and never about God. To take a definitive example, the serpent persuades Eve and Eve persuades Adam that they don't have to regard Eden as a gift, but can treat it as a possession. The serpent's words poison the relationship between them and God, and ultimately between them and each other and Eden itself. The serpent tells them a false story that turns abundance into scarcity, diverting their attention from the glory of the whole garden to focus on the one fruit they can't eat. And the only way for them to be restored is to re-enter a story that's all about them, all about not them, but God. Only when we grasp the 7 steps I've laid out about who God is, and when we recognize and acknowledge the truth of how sin inhibits our lives, can we appreciate what it means to be church. For church is the community in which we seek to live the true story of the 7 steps above in the light of the full story I've briefly just outlined. See, what church isn't? Church isn't tapping into the signs of salvation, baptism and Eucharist to ensure we benefit from Christ's passion in such a way that when we die we go upstairs rather than downstairs. Church is allowing us to be enfolded into a true story, in which we're defined not by our asserted identity, but by our grace-filled belonging. That true story is not one about us, but one in which we're incorporated and granted a role in a story that's all about God. And that true story is one that is in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be about relationship, about God's original, continuing, unbreakable, and ultimate commitment to be in relationship with us. Which means church is about embodying what it means to be with in 4 dimensions. First, to be with God, to pray and thus to enter that point of the aperture between existence and essence that Jesus occupies, which is why we end our prayers through Jesus Christ. To pray is to see paltry existence from wondrous essence, and thus to confess our failure, to see wondrous essence from paltry existence, and thus to marvel and exhort, to offer to essence the fragility of existence, and thus to intercede, to perceive the aperture of Jesus between essence and existence, and the perpetual being with that embodies, and thus to give thanks. Second, to be with ourselves is to be our own companion, the way God is with us, to love ourselves the way God loves us, not to sacrifice ourselves on the altar of guilt or self-rejection, but to fulfill the vocation the Spirit gives to us alone. Third, to be with one another is both to form a community of hope that demonstrates the possibilities of social relations not found elsewhere, and to anticipate heaven by striving to be with all God's children in the light of the true story that there is enough for all and to spare. The calling of the Church is to be with one another now the way we'll be together forever, most obviously to celebrate and embrace those whom the world reviles and persecutes, yet Jesus calls blessed. Fourth, to be with creation is to live God's future now by treating our world as a gift to be enjoyed, not a resource to be expended. In short, it's all about grace, it's all about it's all about story, and it's all about God. The word that draws together grace with story and God is Jesus. And this is the answer to the question with which we began. The significance of our lives is the degree to which we appreciate what Jesus means, not as a device to fix our temporal and eternal problems, not as a badge that makes one person better, more blessed or more righteous than another, but as a mystery of essence and existence that we shall never fathom, but are instead invited to explore together. That universal invitation and shared exploration is not simply the significance of our lives, but the way we shall live forever. Here I stand.
This is about humbler church. How do those 5 ways of my addressing my existence also apply to the existence of the church in relation to God? Humble, generic, etc.
I did write a book called Humble Faith, Bigger God, so it is part of that same project. I guess my worry about the church is if it doesn't follow the 7 steps, and obviously I'm not saying you've got to sort of be dogmatic about that in the way I set them out. That's just a way to put them in a systematic way that makes them something I can explain in half an hour or 40 minutes. But we were having a conversation just at the front here, and Jeffrey was saying I want to belong to a church that lives in the biggest possible arch. And I guess I thought that, that was so good that I wanted to share it with you. That's exactly the way I feel. And I feel that the church often doesn't. It either, well, I gave a couple of examples of what it does instead, one of which is to use the Christian faith as a sort of a weapon to make itself better than other people. But another thing that it can do is to use Jesus as a kind of self-help manual, or sometimes a community organising manual to be a bit more provocative, that offers some kind of technique for organising a better society. So the prayer that puts this best for me, and those of you, I know there are a few people here who've read my book, The Future That's Bigger Than the Past, so you may remember from that book a prayer that is particularly important to me, which goes like this: God of time and eternity, if I love thee for hope of heaven, then deny me heaven. If I love thee for fear of hell, then give me hell. But if I love thee for thyself alone, then give me thyself alone. Now it seems to me that prayer has got to be right. It may be of interest to those of you who don't already know. It's actually a Sufi prayer, so it comes from the Muslim tradition. To which my response is, who cares? And thanks very much, I'll take that one. Because I think that that talks a lot about how we should approach Jesus, and my worry about the way Jesus is approached, particularly by the part of the church that is most certain about Jesus and most certain about how roasted you become if you don't follow Jesus, is that the danger is that you are one of the first two kinds, that you love Jesus for hope of heaven or for fear of hell. I think our quest as a church is to love God for God's self alone. I think if we do that, the rest more or less follows. But it's a very unusual thing in our culture. We do very few things for themselves alone. My word for what we do for itself alone is virtue. That, to the extent to which we live virtuous lives, or to the extent to which we do things not for their end product that we can derive from them, but because they're simply worth doing for their own sake. And there is nothing more worth doing for its own sake than worship.
I'm just wondering if you can talk a little bit more about the expression, it's not all about me. I'm just wondering, are you trying to caveat that a little bit, or is there a degree that it should be about us, or that we're not to use the self as the lens through which we understand the totality that you're exploring? I'm just wondering if you can sort of pull that out a little wider, so I sort of have a little bit of a clear understanding of what it means when you say it's not all about me. To some degree it has to be, but what are the degrees, or am I off a little bit beyond what your focus is?
Well, okay, there's a sort of devotional level on which to answer that question and a sort of historical, philosophical answer. So I'll give you both as briefly as I can, starting with the devotional. The devotional answer is that there is a word, to use a sort of way of constructing a sentence I used 2 or 3 times in my remarks. There is a word that describes what it means for it not to be all about me, and that word is grace. There could have been an existence and there to have been no me. Might have been a better existence. There could have been an existence for there to be no humankind. Might also have been a better existence. There might have been an existence in which there was no world. Again, might have been better. Astonishingly, there is first of all existence. There might have been no existence. There is a world, there is humankind, and there is me. What an astonishing gift of grace that we are here at all. But that only becomes a gift of grace and doesn't turn into an entitlement, so long as we realise those things might not have been. And it seems to me we wake up every day with that astonishing experience of being alive. And however much the shortcomings and frustrations and pain of our lives crowds in, it's still astonishing more than anything else that we've been given life at all. So that's the extent devotionally to which the story is not about me. I think to say how the story became about me, I would probably think of 3 culprits. The first is called Martin Luther, because in his Tower experience he turned the Christian faith from something that was basically in the sacraments and in the book to something that was fundamentally evaluated by the extent to which it worked in our own heart. And that was, that was a shift as radical as anything in the Reformation, and not altogether for the better. Second person is Immanuel Kant, who made, more than anybody else, made human beings the measure of all things rather than God being the measure of all things. And the third would be Friedrich Schleiermacher, who kind of rescued theology from Kant, who, after Kant there was the fear that theology couldn't be done because human beings couldn't actually know for certain anything beyond their sense experience. Schleiermacher said we have a kind of sixth sense called our feeling of absolute dependence, and rescue theology, but at the cost of making it all about me and my experience and my expression of my experience, which was a pretty high price to pay. So it may, for many of you who study theology, certainly to an advanced level, you'll be aware of what I was doing tonight, was making the move that Karl Barth makes, which is in the face of what Schleiermacher has given us in modern theology, which is largely accepted by the whole of the charismatic movement and most of the evangelical movement, by the way. It's not liberal in that sense. We're all liberals since Schleiermacher. But the point that Barth makes is there is an impossible gulf between our sense experience and God, and it's overcome not by us but by God, which is where we get back to grace again.
Hi, my name is Allison, and I'm enjoying your being with, of course, with my congregation. So this is a little advertisement for that.
Absolutely.
And so I'm going to ask you a question that was asked by one of my parishioners when I read a bit about it. Jesus, if you look at the scriptures, Jesus spent 70% of his time being with people.
90%.
90%, sorry. 90%.
30 years.
And she objected strongly to that. She said he taught and overturned the tables and he was an advocate and all this. So I'm wondering how you would respond to that.
Well, so people aren't familiar with this sort of division of labour. So in a couple of my books I talk about the percentages of Jesus. So if you take a traditional view of Christian theology, Jesus died for our sins on the cross kind of thing. Obviously I've problematized that tonight, but if we stick with that, then that's a week in Jerusalem working for us. 3 years in Galilee working with us, and 30 years in Nazareth, give or take however long he spent in Egypt, being with us. So if you translate that roughly into percentages, 1% working for, 9% working with, and 90% being with. So you can tell your parishioner, I'm not denying the 9%. I'm just saying, do the math, as the Americans say, and just see how in our mission the church tends to reverse those percentages and tends to say, well, poor old God, never done an incarnation before, didn't really know how to do it, got to give God a bit of a break. We, of course, 2,000 years later, in all our wisdom, we've got a master's degree, so we know how to do an incarnation, and this is the way you do it. It's all about working for. We get trained up. We do things for people. That's how our society works. That kind of thing. So yes, there is 9-10% of gospel of Jesus' life, the 3 years in Galilee that are spent working with. So your parishioner gets all the teaching and all the healing and whatever it was that your parishioner was very keen to put back in the story. I'm not saying it's not the story, I'm just saying that's 10%. And why do we make it 2,000%? Why don't we look at this that Jesus? Because most atonement theories, to be honest, have no interest in the 99%. If Jesus came to die, then why do we bother with the parables? What are they doing in the Gospels? They're just waste of space. Why do we read them on Sundays? Why don't we just skip to the crucifixion accounts? Or in fact, why don't we skip the Gospels altogether and just read Paul? Which is funny enough what we do. Okay. Time for one, two. It's gone.
Taking what you've shared tonight about looking at our mortality, let's imagine a fairly recent grad who's in their first parish. And so they're in a congregational system that is looking seriously at its mortality, maybe struggling to be in a relationship with one another, struggling to hold on to faith and whatnot. What are maybe some first steps that you would commend to that person in that congregational context?
You're not the centre of the story. I think that's where I'd start. I mean, I think it's mostly in the lecture, but I mean, I guess you're looking at a checklist. I mean, I guess you could divide it into the beginning of the day checklist or the end of the day checklist. By that I mean when you think when you're at your best, I assume at the beginning of the day, your rest is you start the day with a positive attitude, and when you're feeling glum at the end of the day, you try really hard and you need a bit of encouragement. So that's what I mean, two different lists. But if we recognise that it's not always the right time to say the things that I'm going to say, I'm going to say mostly the morning list. So the morning list, you won't be surprised to hear me say, is pretty much like the four widths that I talked about in my remarks just now. So, can you honestly, hand on your heart, say that today you're going to be with God? In what ways are you truly and intentionally seeking to be with yourself, to be with your own companion? Are you with one another in two senses? Are you with your congregation in ways that make manifest that you believe that God truly gives us everything we need, and therefore living an ethic of abundance rather than one of scarcity? And are you with the stranger, a different kind of one another, truly in a way that makes clear to them, subtly, not necessarily overtly, that they are like the Samaritan to your person in the gutter, that they are the surprising form in which God brings you the abundance of God's realm? And then finally, and in what ways are you becoming more with creation, in ways that enjoy creation rather than use it? So I think if you can tick those 5, figuratively speaking, it's not like we can ever get them right, but if you feel that your life is fundamentally about those 5 things, then I think you're onto something.
Talking about our solidarity, God's solidarity with us has been very highly valued. And then, on the other hand, you were saying that God is not to be understood as traditionally, is to fix it. So somebody is going to ask the congregation, well, what is God doing all this time if he's not fixing things?
So, okay, just check you heard the question. What's God doing all this time if not fixing things? If you look at the book of Job, it's mostly remembered that Job's 3 comforters who were much maligned for, to use the language of one philosopher, turning the mystery of theodicy, of why there's suffering in the world, into a problem, and therefore showing how it can be fixed. And they're exposed, of course, of the book, as all of their arguments are flawed. But the part of the story that's usually missed comes really at the very beginning when Job has lost everything, and the friends come to see Job, and they sit with him in silence for 7 one of the Babylonian captivities of Christian theology is that we try to make God more like Job's comforters in the rest of the book than Job's comforters at the beginning of the book. So much so that the ultimate, as I hope I fairly vividly described just a few moments ago, the ultimate portrayal of God's being with us, whatever befall, has been construed for much of the Church's history as a macro act of fixing, which I think you probably got the idea by now I don't agree with. I think Jesus, in becoming incarnate, enters the mystery of existence to invite us to enter within the mystery of God's essence. I think our desire that things should be fixed, if I go back to that prayer I quoted in relation to our first question a few moments ago, our desire that God fix is our desire to turn God into a piece of technology that we can then dispose of in our project of self-assertion and the establishment of our own independence. And I think, the Adam and Eve story, clearly not historical, but tells that story in just a few verses pretty effectively. God has provided us with this life, tiresomely suggested we shouldn't eat the fruit of one of the trees. Has to go. We've got the garden, God's done the job, we can dispense with it. And that's the story of our human folly over and over again. What's even worse, it seems to me, is when we turn the story of what we call salvation into the same kind of story. That seems to me seriously problematic. In fact, devastating when put in those terms. The truth is that many things in life are not actually problems to be fixed, they're mysteries to be entered. You take something like pregnancy, it's not a problem, it's not an illness, it's part of the mystery of being a human being. We can't fix it. We enter into it, whether male or female, in different ways, with all our heart and soul and mind and strength, because it requires all our heart and soul and mind and strength. Well, it seems to me that the really important things in life, and these include death, are mysteries of that kind rather than problems, and mysteries can't be fixed. They have to be appreciated, understood, stood under with humility, entered into, those kind of things. Well, those are the ways that God relates to us. I remember doing a Being With course during the pandemic when we were doing them online, and talking about the fact that God doesn't see us as a problem to be fixed, but as a beautiful mystery to be enjoyed. And one of the people on the Zoom call went quiet for 5 or 10 minutes, which was very much unlike him. And in the end, I said to him, you've been a bit quiet, what are you thinking? And he said, I'm wondering what part of me God most enjoys. Which, suggested he did have a slightly larger ego than the average. But I thought, what a wonderful, wonderful thing to spend 10 minutes meditating. And how counter to the count your sins one by one and make sure you confess every one, otherwise you still might go downstairs. Religion has been propounded for most of the church's history. So, what has God been doing all this time? The answer is enjoying us and enjoying the creation in preparation to share life fully with us and enjoy us forever.
And on behalf of Trinity College's Divinity Associates, we are just thrilled with the response from across the city and across southern Ontario.
I'm just so pleased to share that we are planning a year of events, or maybe I should say a year of creating opportunities for us to be with one another, to continue exploring and creatively playing with some of these concepts and ideas and reflections that Sam has shared. So please connect, I'd suggest, with the Trinity College Faculty of Divinity on social media so you can keep up with the events that will be coming up. One such event is going to be an online book club using Zoom. So imagine reading one of Sam's 50 books together, and I have it from good authority that the author will be present for some of those gatherings by the power of Zoom. If anyone is interested in learning more about Trinity and the Faculty of Divinity, or if anyone would like to learn about making a donation, say to student bursaries, we've got Andrea Herman from Trinity College and also the Dean of Divinity, Christopher Britton, right here. But most of all, I wanted to say and express on behalf of our Divinity Associates hearty and humble thank you to Sam Wells, our speaker. And if I can, I don't know if I have the authority, but on behalf of the Diocese of Huron, my diocese, which I learned tonight was the diocese in which you were born. Hello again. It is good to reconnect. I'm also going to share, as part of my thank you, a poem. And don't worry, it's very brief. This is a poem by Robert Lax. You might know that name. He was Thomas Merton's best friend. He wrote poems in these lines, one syllable at a time, really narrow lines. And the poem goes like this: turn jungle to garden without destroying a single flower. And so I share that in my remarks of thank you, because that poem came to mind as I was reflecting on what Sam shared, this ethic of being with, of us being with one another, but also of God being with us, like at the beginning of the book of Job, not later. God or Christ as the gardener who gently tends, which is a much different approach than the chainsaw or the lawnmower or the weed whacker. So the gentle being with that takes the long approach. Thank you also for describing grace and love and hope and faith in ways that really came alive for myself and I think many of us. Sometimes they can just feel like religious words, but you brought new depth to them. In addition to describing the atonement in a way that had a fulsome humaneness to it that I appreciate. And so Sam, in Thanksgiving, Trinity College will be making a donation to a cause that is dear to you in your homeland. But a smaller gift, but something also that's small and not heavy, so you can take it with you on the plane, is that we have some reading for you to do on the plane by Robertson Davies, who is one of the great figures of Canadian literature of the 20th century, and one of his famous novels, The Rebel Angels, was inspired by his time as a professor at Trinity College. Don't worry, it's not as scary as the cover looks like, but it is an engrossing, humorous, and engaging tale that, as we say here, will give you a bit of a glimpse into the semi-fictionalized past of Trinity College. And so a safe home to everyone, but before you all head out, let's have some refreshments at the back of the nave and a round of applause for Thanksgiving. So,